Welcome to our debate about the future of Europe and about EU enlargement. This is now specific about EU enlargement and how the EU can be a union and shall be a union of 37 member states by 2029. And this is very important because when we enter now all the debate about the future of Europe, the new convention or the whatever the conference it's now called, it's very important that we have to understand that 2013 Croatia was the last country that joined. And I have here this beautiful map which symbolizes all my beliefs and my proposals, the various stages of EU enlargement since the beginning, and I will discuss all of them in this video, but also now to see how it should look in 2029, maybe taking a bit longer, maybe it can be a bit faster. I will also discuss all these aspects in the future, but let's discuss from the top level. We have a global crisis now with Corona. We have a long-standing crisis with Russia. We have this challenge what to do with Central and Eastern Europe. We have done very, very successfully integration with the first 10 and 13 countries, and now it's time for 9 new countries. It's very important for Turkey. There is no membership in the political union possible, but it is possible for the NATO allies. That's very important. It's already Montenegro, North Macedonia, Albania. These are the first countries to join. And then the other 6 countries in the second group, this is the remaining 3 Balkan countries, Kosovo, Bosnia, Serbia, and the 3 countries which are Western allies from Moldova, Ukraine to Georgia. They want to join, they shall join. As I tweeted now to Ursula von der Leyen, please, do we want to have the rest of the Eastern Partnership as well in total crisis? We have Belarus now in total unrest. We have Armenia, Azerbaijan again in the next war. And this is a total disaster, our politics of keeping everybody away. We have to really stabilize the countries, make clear that we are able actor. And this is also to be expected. I'm totally against European sovereignty fantasy debates of Macron, but what we really need to is European responsibility to help at least our Eastern European peers and friends and fellow Europeans. That can be expected, and that will certainly also the next US president. Hopefully it will be Biden, but he will ask the same things from the Europeans, yeah? And that the Americans have to defend Europe with this kind of neglectance of our side for the European Eastern periphery is totally unacceptable. And this will be, I'm confident as well, what the Americans will ask from the Europeans. And not fantasy sovereignty, but real responsibility. And this is the way. This is very much the way. EU 37, meaning the membership of the NATO allies Montenegro, Albania and Macedonia in the EU, on the condition, of course, they have fulfilled NATO membership, and that they adopt the euro before. Very important to adopt the euro before. I made it in many videos already totally clear. We don't want to have a second debate like with Orban, being member and then rejecting and doing devaluations, complete mess on the cost of its population. Such members we don't need. Yeah? And it's also much better and faster progress in the convergence. It's better justified when they are already in the euro, as you see with Montenegro, which has done the adoption and is now already so rich as Bulgaria, which is already 13 years in the European Union. And so really, we have to be a little bit more courageous. And again, I say it very clearly, who doesn't believe in our institutions, NATO, EU, Euro, and doesn't think that they are to be recommended for other countries who want voluntarily to join, please retire. It's not necessary that you are in political power. It's not necessary that you stay in political positions. If you don't believe in the euro, if you don't believe in NATO, if you don't believe in the EU, it's not necessary. Do something else. It's completely fine. It's a free country. But everybody who is in power in the European Union, in NATO and in Euro has to believe in enlargement of this free for the countries who want. We are not an imperialist project to bring something to others who don't want it. If they don't want, good. But it's also conditioned. Yeah? You cannot join the one without the other. It's also impossible. It's impossible to join the EU like Serbia and not to join NATO. Do we really want to have non-allies in the EU? And do we want like countries again to join who then reject the euro, the basis of our prosperity, the one unifying tool of convergence? Yeah? And we don't want that. This is the package. It's not to be divided. Yeah? You cannot divide NATO, EU, and the euro. And I will go in great details now in all these debates. But let's always think where we want to be in 10 years. Might it take a little bit longer? Ukraine, Kosovo. It's not easy, but it's much better to be faster. It's much better to have them inside. We have more access regulatory. We can fight corruption better. We have more regulatory opportunities to really influence what is going on. And if we don't have the full institutional access at the moment, because we have not done it, I will make a separate video on that one. Be sure about it. But this is where we have to be in 2029 with exactly 37 members. And now let me outline where we are at the moment. Just recently, we had the reports of the enlargement. Yeah? And this was absolutely, again, a completely missed opportunity. Because what we do is, now we have a little bit of more leverage financially, and then we somehow say, yes, we have 9 billion. That is good, but it's about a third of the sum which is really needed in the next decade. Yeah? Even more will be needed, absolutely. Yeah? So we cannot buy silence and complicity in this delaying strategy by just putting a little bit of money on the table. No. Where is the potential EU candidate status for Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia? Where is the candidate status for Kosovo and Bosnia? Where is Bosnia, Macedonia Euroized invitation to do that? And also for Albania. This is really the way. And the clear promise that all the countries who do that can also join the European Union in this mandate. It's absolutely no problem that Albania, North Macedonia and Montenegro are in the European Union. I mean, is it a problem that Croatia is in? Is it a problem for anybody that Estonia is in? If it is a problem for you, then please immigrate or retire. It's not necessary. Get out of European institutional framework. Yeah? It's not necessary. Who doesn't believe in the union shouldn't be in power in the union. It's absolutely simple like that. We really have also to make sure that we somehow solve that issue with Serbia, obviously. I have said already, making very clear that this is a package, and with Turkey to get on new terms for them, to make them such a generous offer to reform the customs union and also peg the euro to the lira, and also make a big investment package, which is all very important anyhow for the European Union because of the vital strategic influence and position and role that Turkey plays in cooperation with NATO in that very important area. So we have to do that. And I had a big fight on Twitter and in this video conference just right now, we have to make sure that we really integrate now in the next step Ukraine and Georgia as Moldova in the Southeastern European reform structures and end this divide et impera policy of imperial EU, which is recently now doing so much to keep Ukraine somehow in distance and Moldova and Georgia. And the way to join the EU, I say since 3 years and 4 years actually, since I'm in Ukraine, was in Ukraine for the last 4 years, that it's so important that Ukraine joins an alliance with the Southeastern European partners and all the 9 countries inside the Regional Cooperation Council, CEFTA, and all the other organizations to really form a powerful pre-accession alliance and also get the weight and the significance of Ukraine behind the accession debate, but also to have an economic area in CEFTA, which is also significant, and also hammer the debate about EU 37 with a strategic alliance, with all the allies, and with American help. Ultimately, again, we are incapable continent without American leadership, and hopefully we will have better American leadership now with Biden. And obviously the Americans, it's in their natural interest that the Europeans take more responsibility for the fragile periphery frontline to Russia. So if there's reason in America back again, hopefully they will very much knock in Paris, Berlin and Brussels and Vienna and all the others, for more unity and they have always done that, and we can be so grateful for their support. And we need this American leadership for Ukraine and the Balkans to be in the EU again and again, because we simply are not able to do it, because we are too divided, we are too egocentric, we are too just concerned about our specific national interest, and then we lose the focus and we will be a Russian colony if we don't do it. And it's much better to be American ally than live under Russian-dominated Europe. Please see my video on NATO and the whole history of NATO. Now we talk again about the EU, don't get me wrong, but we have to start at the very decisive moment when the West started and when all the other institutions have started. This is what everybody needs to know. The 14th of August in 41, when the Atlantic Charter was decided by the two leaders of the Western world, of the free world, by Roosevelt and Churchill, they have basically laid the ideological fundament for the free world, for first the victory, then the victory in the Cold War, and all the things which we institutionally did ever since then. This was born on the 14th of August in 41 at this aircraft carrier where they met and where they signed exactly this document. This is the foundational document of the Western world. This is where America has stopped to be a neutral nation. This is where America took responsibility for freedom in Europe. And this is where all the institutions, EU, NATO, OECD, UN, Council of Europe, OECD, all of them, they were later in the various stages created, but the fundament was laid in the Atlantic Charter. And this is the spirit, and we need America very much engaged again now in this second Cold War to be helpful for Ukraine in the EU and for the Balkans. So let's celebrate also the huge and decisive influence, and it's about ideology, obviously. It's about ideology means the line of thinking, a concept of thought. That means this American kind of federalism, individual freedom, responsibility, good governance, and this was really laid down in this American created Western Germany, BRD, from the basic law, the Grundgesetz, towards the institutional framework, towards the Western integration and the hard currency policy. All these fundamentals is in this kind of new America in the heart of Europe, the recreated Western German Republic. This is really the core of the Western project, and we can be very grateful. And this is basically, I speak about it a lot because this needs to be recreated in Ukraine, in the Balkans, hard currency, NATO policy, alliance towards the West, what Adenauer called Westbindung, what we call Western integration in a way, but it's not just a direction of West, but it's a value community. It's the Atlantic Charter community, basically. This is what it is. And here I have the photo of Lucius Clay. He was the American general in charge of the BRD, and he has done all this wonderful progress together with his Western German partners, with Adenauer. And it needs to be understood very well how this was. It needs to be again explained as well in Ukraine, as well in the Balkans, but as well in Germany and Austria, that we are based on this value community of the Atlantic Charter and the BRD. Obviously, this basis could only, first we had to be liberated, and here again the Americans liberated us in Western Europe, but also made it possible the defeat of the Nazis in Eastern Europe. And it's again a very important debate. A lot of people who have later then seen this Soviet kind of narrative that the Soviet Union has defeated the Nazis. Without the logistical, financial, military technology support of the United States, it would have been very complicated and it was anyhow very complicated to win this war also in the East. So it's the European Liberation Day is on the 8th of May. It's not the Victory Day on the 9th. And the 9th of May is the Foundation Day of the European Union, an important debate. And the 9th of November is the day when the Berlin Wall fell and the victory then was completed, because the Soviet Union finally fell and the second evil empire has been crumbling, and later in 91 also fell apart. So And then we have this Liberation Day. It's very important to say thank you to the Allies, but also to understand not what they do now in Berlin, to celebrate as if, the left-wing authorities in Berlin do the 9th of May and somehow repeat all the Soviet commemoration and celebration narrative as if they would be a Russian oblast. Yeah? It's not like that. Yeah? Thank you, USA. This must be the first message. Obviously, also the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union was an evil empire. It is a terror regime. We are not celebrating terror regimes in the European Union of 2020. So let's come to the fundamental three sisters which were created in the year 49. Because why 49? Because in the beginning the Americans withdrew again because they didn't really want to stay in such a dimension in Western Europe, contrary to the Soviets. But they totally destroyed Western Europe. Was of course easy prey for the Soviets, and then General Marshall, then the foreign minister, he created the Marshall Plan and the organization to administer the Marshall Plan, the OECD, the Union of Market Democracies, which still has an important role to play and should have a much more important role to play in the future. But again, it must be really communicated every generation of Europeans to learn that this was very generous and this was very smart. This is what the OECD is about. We should now also revigorate the OECD to have Ukraine and the Balkans in, not to be an exclusive club of the very super rich of the world, but also enlarge it and to be a very much active tool as the Union of the Market Democracies. But see the timeline when we are here now in April 49, and then obviously we have this wonderful debate about and then the 9th of May, obviously that was in the year 1950, and I just have to find now the right slide for this moment, because I have here the 9th of May. Of course, Jean Monnet, the father of Europe, he is obviously the man who has created the European Union as a vision. He has helped to develop everything from the start, and he is obviously the father of Europe, is the role he has. And I just have to find now a little bit the slide which I wanted to show at this moment. Yeah? And I have maybe to see if I'm now on the totally correct presentation. Yes, okay, there was two presentations. My apologies if you bear with me for one moment. Here, of course, you have the right, correct version. There were too many presentations already. Let me maybe come back to Marshall Plan, so I'm understandable, yeah, because I want to be very clear. Also, if you are interested in the foundation history, check everything on Wikipedia, read other things, yeah. But here is the Marshall Plan. This is the one pillar. Here I have the more logical presentation, and this is the Council of Europe, again 49. So I want to reiterate how it was. Yeah, here 16th of April 49, very important. Yeah, then came the 5th of May and the starting of the Council of Europe. That is what I call the Churchill Day, because it's important to understand the various institutions. Here again, Marshall Plan, OECD, here the Council of Europe with Churchill. It was Churchill's idea, it was Churchill's project, it is intergovernmental, it's about human rights protection, it's about democracy, about elections. It's a really very powerful, important contribution to the European framework. It has now to look, because the EU has developed and fine-tuned its activities and enlarged, obviously, it's important to relocate the Council of Europe now from Strasbourg to Gdansk and to focus on Eastern Europe. Yeah? Speak Russian, speak Turkish, this is the task now, to bring democracy and human rights towards Russia, Central Asia, towards Eastern Europe in a sense. But this is now important to readjust a little bit the situation. And then in this wonderful year, 1949, it was also NATO created. So in just 1 month, from 4th of April to the 5th of May and to the 16th of April. In 1 month, all these 3 institutions were created. I mean, it's quite extraordinary when you think about it. And really, it has to be celebrated as it is. Yeah. And of course, this was the big moment, the real historic miracle that the US stayed in the EU, in Europe. And why it stayed? Because of the Soviet threat. I mean, the Russians wanted to take the rest of Europe as well, especially continental Europe. Yeah? And this was, of course, blocked by the Americans, and so these 3 institutions were created. And then there was this big idea of supranationality, repeating the American success story, and here Jean Monnet comes into the framework. First, you had these 3 multilateral organizations, intergovernmental organizations, the Council of Europe, and NATO, and the OECD. And then came Jean Monnet, and he has really pushed the whole idea of supranationality. Meaning, what is supranationality? To repeat the American continental unification process. Obviously, you know, these people all knew the constitutional theory of America. They all knew what was going on with the foundational process of America and the various stages of getting more enlargement, the Civil War. The whole constitutional debate was very much, they were aware. They also were all in power in Europe, and they were 20 years younger, but they knew already the failure of the League of Nations. They were partly themselves involved in all these processes. They have experienced 2 world wars. They wanted to make it better. And they understood they have to really make this European Union in the model of America. And that's what they basically did. And that's what I also argue the whole time since I'm in Ukraine. You have to do the same process with the coal and steel community as well. Now with Ukraine, reform it like the BRD and take all this, merge the defense industry of Ukraine as we have done it with the coal and steel merger in the community in the 50s. And this is very important. This is the Schuman, the father of Europe. There's a little bit of competition between Schuman and Monnet, who is the father of Europe. I personally see much more Monnet as the ideological driver and promoter of unity and also of supranationality. But obviously, you know, it was very important to have a French political leader to be ready for that, because the French are already, of course, playing a crucial part in the unification and the most complicated part of the unification. So the 9th of May, that was in the year 50, when Schuman created the European Coal and Steel Community. That's the foundational moment of the European Union. And that's why it's important as well when we always discuss about the 8th and 9th of May, and all this debate is maybe confusing. The 8th is Liberty Day for the World War II, and the 9th is the foundation day of the European Union, and not the Russians dominate our commemoration and celebration culture. Can we achieve the continental union? Obviously, you know, that's the real dream of Monnet. He was an investment banker. He knew the world very well. He knew America very well. He understood the industrial and financial potential of a continental union. So that's really the task. EU 37 is in his tradition, the unification to reach North American prosperity level. We are still not so much united as America, neither including Ukraine and the Balkans, but also internally we are not so united. And then we miss this kind of heavy price of European disunity, I call it. Yeah? I call it ultimately we should produce about $12 trillion more if we are on North American prosperity level. And this we cannot achieve as long as we are so disunited. And we are really a mess economically and politically still today, and so much behind. When it comes to the European Commemoration Day for Dien Bien Phu, I'm very much in favor of the 7th of May, commemorating the colonial crimes in Vietnam, what we did, from the French to the Americans, absolutely. But, you know, also see that 7th of May in that week, because without that defeat, I'm not sure that the French would be ultimately have consented to NATO enlargement of the BRD, but also the next step of European unification with the treaties of Rome and the Messina Conference have to be understood that the French Empire was basically defeated by the Chinese and the Vietnamese in North Vietnam. Still, it was not their own state, but it was in Dien Bien Phu when Europe was created. Obviously, there is many like these sentences. Europe was created by the Korea War, by Suez Crisis, by Dien Bien Phu. You can vary, but it was a major level of defeats around, which has basically driven home the point that European unification is the future, despite everything terrible that happened in World War II. Here comes the moment every European really needs to celebrate, the EU Day, the Messina Day. It was this conference in Messina which prepared and the 6 countries leaders to really go for the Rome Treaty. It was Monet who designed the whole process, and it was really the one big moment. The spirit of Messina, we need it again. It's obviously always very complicated. Also, the next stage of unification will be very complicated. So let's remind ourselves always how complicated it was back then in that conference, at that kind of really crisis in the Cold War in Europe, still so much destroyed and so difficult, and it was possible to achieve it. So we shall be very proud about it. And obviously Messina led then to the Treaty of Rome, the 25th of March in 57 for the celebration, and we just went through that moment, and that was really very courageous to do it. Imagine always where we came from, World War II, the Cold War, and then and the long-term antagonism of the Western European states among each other, and the many terrible history we had. And then we were able to do that, our founding fathers, to sign this document, the Treaty of Rome, in the spirit of Messina, and to go from this kind of defense, material union, coal and steel, the basic products that you need for war, to unite that, and then to go in the next stage towards the Treaty of Rome, the real foundational moment. And that needs to be always celebrated again, because here the supranationality was already very much part of it. I want to add also then in the foundational history, because you cannot discuss everything, but I want to very much focus on Euratom. Why? Because it's so important that in the beginning always energy was so much in the center. Energy you need for industry, obviously you need for war, you need to regulate that in order to keep peace. And nuclear energy was very much at the core of the European unification already in the 60s. And we have managed to have this merger treaty in 65 and Euratom treaty. This was very, very much important beginning. Now, sadly, we still have some countries which are with Rosatom. And that's, of course, a very big crisis from Finland to the Czechs, the Slovaks, and others are thinking about, and Hungary especially, very terrible that in Eastern Europe the Russians are doing nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, you can like it or not. I'm more neutral on that one. The Germans now leave it. There's a big debate about that one. I'm generally thinking we can not have just one energy policy on nuclear in Europe. The French won't leave it anyhow. But what we really shouldn't do is to invite in such a strategic and dangerous and important strategic energy field a hostile power like Russia. And no, there shouldn't be any Rosatom projects in the European Union. Why I say this? Because the 60s were very much about energy. I always call the 1st of June the celebration day for the European Energy Union. Why? Because the 1st of June in 68 was the moment the Soviet pipelines of gas reached Austria and therefore Central Europe, and then this very terrible 70s started because the Soviet Union got super rich by our energy consumers, and we started this huge dependency on Russian gas and energy, and that's of course a big problem, and we really need to get rid of it. We should not be dependent on Russia in the energy field anymore. and this is very important for our strategic independence. Not we can be trading with Russia. We should trade with everybody freely and fairly, but not to be blackmailed and not to be bought by this energy weapon which the Russians use against Europe since 1968. Yes, and all this money with and then came the oil shocks, the currency shocks. Yeah. But Russia, Soviet Union could be very strong. All these crises because they had the European energy bills. Yeah, and they really had a wonderful decade from 71 or from 68 towards 79, and they were even full of hubris to then start the Afghanistan war, and then basically came the gradual decline of the Soviet Union in the 80s. But it was really our terrible decade, the 70s, and also in Europe there was not much progress. We had, luckily, in this crisis, the wisdom that the UK and Ireland and Denmark could join, but the European Union itself was really in a sclerotic and difficult phase, as the whole West was. The 70s were economically, strategically, and from EU perspective, a real crisis for Europe and for the Western world. So came the moment, and then with gradually getting the strategic situation under control, like the NATO double track, and the West really revigorated, yeah, in many aspects with Reagan, with obviously Thatcher and Kohl, these important strategic decisions that led also then to the development of the EU internal market, the Single European Act in 86, and that was the big breakthrough where the successful European Union, which we know now, was basically started at this moment in 68. In 86, before this period, especially from the start of the Werner Plan, the failure of the Werner Plan, basically from 68 to 86 was really very difficult for the European Union, and it was really not very successful project and process for the Western world. And, then came also the enlargement. In that moment, it got parallel to get Greece, Spain, and Portugal into the European Union. Always think at the timeline of enlargement. And then you have the moment where it really, of course, accumulated in the one, I call it the post-Cold War Peace Conference. We didn't have a big conference after the end of the Cold War like we had like the Vienna Congress or so, because it was also not a victory by war. It was a victory by economic success. It was a victory by ideological success, a victory of freedom, not a war. The victory of the Cold War was very special. And obviously it was only a victory of the end of socialism in Europe. So it's quite logical that we had a post-Cold War victory conference. And that means the Maastricht Treaty, basically. That was the way for the euro. That was the way for the German unity. That was the way for the European enlargement. This is the most important conference. Yeah? And it was a big success, and I'm so happy about it. And we now need a second Maastricht conference and really also make the second wave or the third wave of enlargement possible. But now let me talk about the second wave of enlargement. This is, of course, the 10 countries of 2004. That was the big success. And always think about, in the year 98, it was almost impossible that Slovakia joined together with the Czechs and the Poles and the Hungarians, because it was with a pro-Russian government, like Moldova is, or like Serbia is. Then came the reform, then came the real economic reform on the 30th of October, Prime Minister Dzurinda, Finance Minister Miklos, and they did everything right, and then it was really possible that Slovakia is now such a big success story. Look, Slovakia GDP per capita in 2019 is $4,000 per capita above Poland. I mean, this is amazing success, and great leadership. We can be so proud, and these were really the fundamental moments. Obviously, what we did in parallel. So in parallel, we did the whole agenda, competitive Europe, Lisbon agenda, also to try to have Southern Europe and Western Europe to compete, because Eastern Europe, the new enlargement, was already, very much on a competitive direction. But obviously, we tried. There was a big effort for a competitive Europe. It was partly some success, but of course, there's a lot of socialist leftovers in Southern and Eastern and Western Europe, and we still have very high taxes, and we don't have strong SME policy, unfortunately, in much of Western and Southern Europe, and this needs to change. We obviously had also then this SME charter and the beginning of a really very SME focused policy in the European Union, just to remind you on the development parallel economically. And what then, obviously, 1st of May 2004, I already talked about it. We should not have the 1st of May as the day of work and any kind of socialist tradition, but the day of unity and enlargement, of European unity and enlargement, because this is the day in 2004 when the 10 new countries entered, and needs to be celebrated every single day again on the 1st of May, how successful EU enlargement is and European unity, and that is really the way. Parallel, obviously, some tried to go in different directions. I was already then very skeptical, and they had all this kind of constitutional process, and they said they will do referendum, but they lost it. Yeah, it's what I call the 18th of June. We need to have a step-by-step progress in unification. You cannot really go too fast in deepening, because anyhow we need first to enlarge. Yeah? And then they had this big constitutional process, and then the countries who pushed it so much, the Dutch and the French, insisted on a referendum and lost it. I mean, how hilariously, tragically, actually. And then it was, in the 10th of July, was still the Luxembourgians, good soldiers for pro-European. They got still a majority, while everybody else, the Dutch and the French, who actually pushed very much for this constitutional process, they couldn't bring the positive results. And here very much you see in this kind of ambivalence of the French elite and the Dutch elite talking very pro-European but not carrying the population along. This is what I call European megalomania. We first have to do the homework, first really make sure that Ukraine and the Balkans are in, to really have enlargement first, and parallel look on the economic prosperity, and not to have any kind of sovereignty talk, European sovereignty, because this has really led to Brexit. And Brexit has a lot of aspects. Putin very active, British imperial designs and colonial inferiority complex, or however you want to call it. But, and then, of course, the migration crisis, the Syrian war, and the Ukrainian war, and then we had this terrible day for Europe, and we live in infamy forever. This was the crisis of the referendum, and, we have lost the United Kingdom, and all the political elites who were in charge of this crisis year, they have to really consider as well if they have done everything right, and I don't think they have, because it was exactly this mentality which led then to this result. And instead of really focusing on containing hostile Russia, intervening reasonable in Syria, and transforming the economic systems, we did all this kind of talk. Empty it was, no results, and then we lost, first time in the history, a country. What a shame. And the only one who benefits, obviously, is Putin. And you see the crisis in the UK. It's really difficult now for them, and this has to be also tackled. So what I say for the future is very clear. We need a new Werner plan. That was the plan in the 70s adopted for the currency union. And we have to make sure that the Eastern Europeans are invited to adopt it if they're not member, or that the already members join. Especially Romania, very important. And to make sure that Romania joins, and then we have already Bulgaria and Croatia. but it all takes much too long for no reason. It's always the fear of the Germans that the euro is going to be weaker. No, it's going to be stronger if more people use it. It's going to be stronger if it will be the currency of Eastern Europe as well. And this is really what we need. These are very competitive countries. These are really hardworking people. They will be a major asset for the European economy, for the Eurozone. So we need a euro of 33 countries. That means 9 adopters. Kosovo and Montenegro are the role model, and the others to adopt the currency, including Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and the Eurozone. Obviously, also Denmark and Sweden should join. Then will be 36 actually. Much better, and then we are a relevant European global currency, and it doesn't start with any kind of competing with the dollar or dreams of global megalomania, which the French seem to have again. That will always lead us into defeat. What really is success is doing the fundamentals, allowing more people to benefit from the working institutions we have. Here comes a very concrete proposal. We have the Germans doing their separate energy deal with the Russians. Obviously, that's very bad whenever it's a great business for some. And it's the Polish who are led by Eurosceptics who don't want to join the euro, but are very much against the Nord Stream 2. So my hope is for the Americans and President Biden, hopefully, to come back in 2021 and talk sense to the Europeans. Yeah? We don't need this pipeline. We have enough carbon. We don't like carbon energy anyhow anymore in Europe. So cut this pipeline, Mrs. Merkel or her successor, and then also Poland, then join the Eurozone. This will be very much pressing the Russians when they lose the pipeline and Poland has joined the Eurozone and Ukraine best as well to adopt the euro. Then we will be strong and perceived as relevant partner, and the Russians will be very careful to mess with us because we are much more united. Ultimately, this is what it is about, yeah. And when the French, what should they do? They do the separate peace deal with the Russians because they see the Polish and Germans anyhow run their own policy. So if everybody does what he wants, we will not be very successful in Europe. So I appeal, make a deal. Germany, cut Nord Stream, and Poland join the Eurozone. It's painful for both elites, and probably then it's a good deal. So, okay, this is of course very annoying, President Trump and all his separate Hungarian and Polish policy, while the Hungarians are selling out Europe against Ukraine with Gazprom, and then they are the best buddies of Trump. Also this encouragement of anti-Europeanism in Poland, and then they get some soldiers. I mean, this was all complete nonsensical. And really, always when it comes to the budgetary contribution, see that the Central European taxpayers, the Germans especially, pay already massively for the progress and prosperity in Eastern Europe. And that also needs to be taken into consideration. So please, US, encourage unity in Europe. This is always much better for the American interests. And as well, it's in the Macedonian Greek case, we need to have fast-track conciliation and reasonable processes. We need to repeat what the Germans, French have done with their reconciliation. That needs to be done with the Macedonians and the Greeks, the Macedonians, North Macedonians and the Bulgarians, North Macedonians and the Albanians, and so on and so on. It's not easy, Europe is not an easy continent, and it was never, and it will be never. But the way is to learn from the past, be ready for the future, and also do it on good, decent economics, and enlarge the existing institutions. And very important, all the countries before they join the EU have to join the WTO. So it's very important. We have triple accession of Bosnia, of Serbia and Kosovo. These are the only 3 enlargement countries which are not in the WTO. They could block themselves as well beautifully with all the various alliances, but this has to be avoided. It's necessary that they join together. One big argument is always corruption, that they are corrupt. I want to reiterate that Georgia is already at 44. That's 8 countries in the European Union that are worse than Georgia. So it's not exactly that there is such a great progress on that one, and it's not that we can exclude Some countries, Georgia is very good. Moldova has made some progress. Okay, not so good. Ukraine, not so good. Some things needs to be done in these oligarchic countries. Accession will help very much because then we have a better regulatory framework and that helps. Not perfect as you see with Bulgaria and Romania, but much better than it ever was. And much needs to be done, obviously, on that front. But Montenegro has already very good result, and we are having real results here. So it's important to unite the debate about Eastern Partnership and CEFTA, the Adriatic Charter for NATO accession, the various institutions building bilateral partnerships, have the institutional learning network of the Southeastern European countries ready for the Eastern Europeans, and that we really have progress here in the region. So, I want to talk for the EU to be the twin pillar of the Western world together with the USA. It's very important because we always equal, everything seems to be equal. The UK equal, the EU equal, Russia seems to be very big, China seems to be very big, It's a little bit confusing, and so I have put the numbers of the population and the annual output. Yeah? And I have also summed it up, what it means for the Western world and what it means for our alliance system and what is really the economic, fiscal power, population significance. And let's see a little bit how it is. The US obviously by far still the richest and strongest economy, also per GDP per capita. But the European Union with 18 trillion and 450 million and another 70 million which want to join the European Union from Ukraine to the Balkans, really we are a relevant partner and we need to be more united than we are also taken more seriously by Russia, by China, and also by our twin partner in the West, the United States of America. And, we should not be divided with the UK and the US. We will stay very strong allies. And also they will not invent any other regulatory system. And the chicken and the chlorine chicken shall not divide us when it comes to so important points. And when you add the North Americans with Canada, Mexico, EFTA, and European, obviously the UK under normal situation should join EFTA or CEFTA, but let's see how it will be settled. But when you take in non-Russian Europe and basically the NATO allies, EFTA allies, EU together, then you come to a very significant output level in the world, yeah? About 50 trillion of the 86 trillion which we have in the world in 2019 is produced by the free world. So there is no reason for any kind of crisis or any kind of blah blah, the end of the West or something like this. We just need a bit more united, a little bit more open, and lower taxes would help as well. And we can repeat another 30 years of Western secured peace and amazing progress of the last 30 years with no less than 2.5 billion more people in the world, with no less than 68 trillion more GDP, and really cannot understand all this kind of blah blah on globalization. Since the victory of the West in the Cold War 30 years ago, we have added unprecedented amount of people, population globally, and unprecedented amounts of prosperity in real trillions of US dollars, from 22 to 86, and from 5.5 trillion to 5.5 towards or close to 8 trillion. I mean, this is for one generation of peace, unbelievable. Obviously, we don't have peace everywhere. We had also terrible events and regional wars. But in principle, we could win this Cold War confrontation with the terrible, evil empire of the Soviet Union, and it was so amazingly successful. Still, the Europe is not perfect. It's very good to compare the member states of the United States with the European Union member states. And you see we are like just a few of the European states, like Luxembourg, Sweden, and just the Netherlands, just the richest ones, Denmark. They can really enter the top league of the rich states of unions. Yeah? So we are really much behind and we have to catch up. I'd call it, as you know already, the $12 trillion questions, why we are not so rich as the Americans, because we are not as united And that's really very important. And Euro nationalism and the third way, anti-American Europe, is a complete idiocy. It's not working. The French cannot mislead us into this kind of trap. It's not working. We will not build a third way T2S Yugoslavian kind of European Union, but we will build a NATO-backed and secured European Union of 37, and this will be very, very successful. No global megalomania, no empty grandstanding, no Euro nationalism, but a global Europe and really open to the world with a strong Euro, but including Ukraine and Eastern Europe. That's very relevant. And I've summed up my philosophy, I think, in this beautiful line. I didn't mention all of them, Mises and Acheson, Truman, Churchill, yeah. I think it's really Hayek. These are the people you need to learn. These are the 10 founding fathers of in the European Western institutions, and we can be very grateful for all of them. And they have obviously led then, in the 90s when there was first Maastricht, and then we have defined exactly the EU has defined the Copenhagen criteria, who can really join, worked very well, major success. The spirit of Copenhagen should be celebrated every day again, because this is really very much clear that Ukraine and Georgia can join Moldova as well. We have then done for the Balkans 10 years later, after the wars, the very clear commitment join that was reiterating the Copenhagen criteria, inviting all countries to join. And now we have already several of them in the European Union, so that was in principle a very good success. But obviously, we are always hesitant. Russia is bigger, stronger. So we need now EU potential candidate status for Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. That's very good. And obviously, then also to make clear that Bosnia is joining as next country NATO and adopting the euro and joining. And then obviously, to clean up some obvious mess, we have not included Kosovo in the Council of Europe whenever the results of Kosovo, which was basically built from scratch from the European Union and the partners, US, Japan and everybody. But, it's much better than, for example, Serbia or other countries which were continuations of Yugoslavian structures and have never done so many international support. And so you see Kosovo should be in the Council of Europe. That would be very good. And then all the three countries, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Albania, to end this stupid conditionality and focus on the fundamentals in this crisis. They have all reached now the Bulgarian level of 2006-7, so in GDP per capita, and they have the fundamentals. They just need to adopt the euro and then to be all the three NATO members to be in the European Union. It's much better policy than what we currently do. So I have made it very clear the numbers. Montenegro in the EU as 28th member, very good, absolutely, this is doable. It's a small country, it has the euro already, it works very well, it has all the parameters fulfilled. So 28, then 29th is Macedonia, North Macedonia, has now made the peace agreement with Greece, has already pegged the currency, has the economic fundamentals are fine, and so get it in fast. Together with, of course, the 30th member, Albania, should adopt the euro. The lake is really a mess, but it has worked more or less fine recently. But I think small currencies anyhow not a very good idea. If you anyhow want to join the European Union, immediately adopt it and don't be left behind. Montenegro and North Macedonia will otherwise go ahead, and that would be not good. So the three countries, Kosovo, Bosnia, Serbia, will be united again in the European Union, not like some in Serbia maybe want to take some parts and pieces. That's certainly not going to happen. And then to be hopefully in the euro. Kosovo has it already. Bosnia has a pegged currency, can easily adopt the euro, and Serbia should definitely do that as well. Then join NATO, and then to be ready for the next 31st membership. It can be then 2027, 2029, but first of all to adopt NATO and the EU. And I'm sure that most Bosnian Serbs will be very happy to have the euro and to be also much richer and to have more inclusiveness into the European system. If we talk this message very clearly, I'm sure they will also consent towards NATO. NATO is anyhow no problem. In Kosovo, it's totally pro NATO. And then this is the 32nd country. The 33rd is Georgia. It's obviously first NATO and then the Euro, and then to continue the good reforms. And you will see that also the breakaway regions, it's no problem because they will join like Saxony and Thuringia one day. And once the prosperity differential is so high that the Russians have to build walls at the borders to keep the population in, as they had to do in 61 in Berlin. And then the 31st is the Ukraine, the same principle in CEFTA Regional Cooperation Council, and to do all that. And then 35th is Moldova, adopt the euro, join the EU. Then we have obviously 36th country, that is Serbia. They should also stop buying weapons from Russia and China and threatening their neighbors. So without NATO membership, it's impossible for them to join, and the euro obviously as well. And if you don't like the euro, which I got a lot of negative feedback from the Serbs on my YouTube page, then please stay where you are, fine. If you want to join the EU, first join NATO, then don't buy weapons from Russia and China, and also become fully pro-European country, and honor the, first of all, recognize Kosovo as well, but also then connect Chilan and Bujanovic with the Choron-Chinchic peace highway from Chilan to Bujanovac, because that's really very important to build decent highways and name them appropriately after the real heroes who brought down Milosevic, the terror of the Balkans, starting 4 wars. And then the 5th of October must be European Day, the European Balkans Freedoms Day, to celebrate the 5th of October, 20 years now. Obviously, Mr. Vucic was not making it a big party, but this needs to be done. And we can then continue the massive subsidies. Serbia is the country in the world which gets per capita most EU funding. And this is 10 billions of euros in loans and in support for highways and for a lot. And then obviously Serbia uses this fiscal space created by these massive European subsidies then to buy weapons from Serbia and from China. That's of course completely unacceptable. So why it's important, essentially, and logical and obligatory to join NATO before EU membership? It might be nowhere written, but we must be utterly mad to let any kind of country into the European Union which still has fantasies of pro-Russian policies and which has attacked all its neighbors and which buys weapons and the EU from Russia and China and threatens the neighbors which are NATO allies. So that would be simply impossible. And 93% of EU citizens are anyhow NATO citizens, so others hopefully will join. And we have in the EU no kind of tools for military security intelligence reforms. So this is all NATO stuff, and it's anyhow the same member states, so it makes no sense at all. And so basically, without it, there's no way in. That's obviously also for the UK, it is very much welcome. That's also the 37th member state once it has decided. But obviously now for returning, it must be clear that this is a currency union as well. And it must be prior to adopt the euro as well for the United Kingdom. So when you really decide to come back one day, you're very welcome. I mean, you can be back after the next elections, but no more debates about currencies, no more half in, half outs. Yeah? You know, we want good members, straight members. We want a strong internal market, a strong unity of the West, but also a strong currency union. So next time, please adopt the euro before. That's basically the entry ticket into the European Union. Also, whatever will happen, maybe in some fantasy world, Scotland or Wales or whatever, you know, first show that you really want, adopt the euro, and then join the European Union. So that's basically all based on the same logic. What I call the Adenauer plan of West integration. He did it exactly like that, having a firm German currency without any kind of Soviet manipulation, backed by the US dollar and backed by the Americans. And this was the way to do it, and firmly going into NATO and somehow making a strong alliance between America and Western Germany. This is the Adenauer plan for the Western Balkans and for Eastern partnership. We also don't need a second Marshall Plan. I see always the Lithuanians referring to Marshall. That's an American politician who has historically done a lot. We should honor him always. But now it's no longer about American taxpayers' money to be redistributed, but mainly about German taxpayer money, which will be redistributed to Ukraine and to the Balkans. So it's much better and also more ideological useful to talk about Adenauer plan because it's getting clearer. It's not only about money. It's also about Western integration. It's about rejecting neutrality. It's about NATO membership. Yeah? This was the historic achievement of Adenauer. He led Western Germany into NATO, and this was really what he did so successfully. And he has really supported supranationality in the European Union when others were only talking about intergovernmental cooperation. And he was the man who really built the currency very strong from the start, the basic law, the Grundgesetz. Yeah? This is what we need. We need an Adenauer plan for Eastern Europe, and this is the right role model to put. And for all of Europe, we obviously need a Helmut Kohl plan. You know, this is very important to unite more. We have now done this recovery fund, very big. That is, I don't understand why Sebastian Kurz and the Dutch have done such a mess. This was a very wonderful thing, but it has to be well spent, obviously. Spent on enlargement, spent on Eastern European infrastructure, really unite Europe, spent on getting Ukraine into the European Union. We have now and built the infrastructure to connect us with Africa and Asia. You know, now we have this money, not to waste it on Italian welfare or other things, you know. Obviously, we have to help everybody in a crisis, yeah, and we will do that, and we are doing that, yeah. But most of all, and the key priority now is obviously to have a united Europe and to include the countries. Because, wow, to get the Italians and the Spanish richer, that's definitely, you know, is also their task to reform their systems. But first of all, and that's the overriding responsibility of any Commission president, of any European leader, it's to unite Europe and to bring more countries in. We have these 9 countries, as I have outlined, the 37 countries, and this is very much the task, and this is the responsibility to unite Europe. I come back to this foundational moment and how I have designed it. Here is basically the moment of unity where we can really have progress, and we need to have more courage, and we need to include all these beautiful countries on the basis of our values, on the basis of what we have done in the various institutions which were created at the end of the start of the Cold War to save Western Europe from the Soviet menace. And it was really possible to achieve such a amazing progress in prosperity over the last 70 years. And we need more of that. We need more unity. We need to overcome this kind of terrible disunity which we have at the moment. And we have to see that we are also in global competition. And we have this partnership alliance with America, but we have hostile Russia, we have China, which we will see how it will act in the future. But obviously it's economic competition, and we need to be more united to secure another successful 30 years, as we had the last 30 years of globalization and European peace, and the next 30 years as well to be built on the same institutions, but to include Eastern Europe and to deepen and further our integration in the next years. That's the task for the coming years. Always remember the spirit of our founding fathers, here especially Konrad Adenauer, and in that spirit, please open the way for Ukraine and for the Balkans, Moldova and Georgia in the European Union, and unite Europe to be 37 countries. Thanks a lot.